We're having way too much fun here today. All right, with that, welcome back. Building websites using Python and Django. Alongside my host, Casey McCall, I am Dan Rydell. Now, we left off in the prior module taking a look at templates. And one of the things that you probably noticed about my resultant HTML, in fact, we can go ahead and take a look at it, is it's kind of terrible, don't you think?
It's it looks like, and I don't mean this unfortunately in a good way, it looks like something I would create.
Yeah.
And I am not known for my front-end design.
Yeah, no. Okay. So we need to do something else. So we need to figure out some way that we can kick that up. And on top of that, we probably at some point want to be able to deploy this out somewhere so somebody could use it. And that's exactly what we're going to take a look at. So we're going to talk about how to ensure consistency. We're going to talk a little bit about Bootstrap, and then we're going to take a look at how to deploy this. And sort of as I mentioned before, this is kind of a few things that we just didn't fit into other modules, and they wound up here, which is typically what happens. So let's talk a little bit about ensuring consistency. And when we stop to think about a typical website, you know, kind of like our music store, is what we're going to have is some form of a banner maybe on top, set of links over there on the left, and then we're going to have our data, our ooey gooey center, inside of the middle of the page. And the way that we're going to do that by using templates is by creating a layout. So inside the layout, I'll define this is what goes up top. I'll define this is what goes off to the side. And then I'm going to say, all right, well, other people can put data there. And then what you're going to do is inside of your little details page, or whatever it is that it might be, you're just going to define the green section. You're not going to define any of the outer part of that, any of the outer chrome, if you will. You're only going to define the inner part. Now, the user is going to be completely oblivious to this. This is going to be transparent to the user, that the user is just going to see whatever the final result is of the HTML being put together. So the way that we're going to build then the parent or the template is by setting up, here's our little layout, is we're going to say, all right, well, there's our little logo, whatever HTML is going to be required for that. There's our navigation. There's the HTML for that. And then finally, last but not least, is here's our block, and that's now going to be the placeholder. So this might be main content. This might be additional links. This might be sidebar. Whatever it is that you want to be able to allow your child pages to actually put data into. And to kind of keep this going one step further is when we get to that child page, like our artist details, then all of the outside is already going to be defined. What we're going to do to get that outside is we're going to say, hey, point to that layout, point to that base by using the verbiage extends, and then we'll go ahead and say, all right, well now here is the actual content that we're going to put into there. Or to kind of bring all of that together, let's go back to Visual Studio and let's take a look at things. You're going to notice inside of here that we already have a little file called layout.html. And if we open this up, what you're going to notice is that this has already been built for us. And in fact, it's going to be using Bootstrap, and we'll get to all of that in just a couple of minutes here. Now, here's the cool thing is that it's already there. And if you're anything like me, and I know I am, I like to use what has already been built. After all, thank you. After all, the best code in the world is the code that's already been written. So let's just take advantage of what's already there. So if we take a look at what's already here, we do have some additional like little Django things and so forth, and some Bootstrap things, but this is really the main part that I want to highlight. There is the block where we can put our content. So all I have to do if I want to use this is just go back to one of my HTML pages, say for example, maybe my artists, and get rid of everything that would make this an HTML page. Because all of that was provided by the layout. That if I open that layout back up again, you're going to notice that up at the very top here, whoosh, that there is our HTML, our head, and our body. And if I scroll all the way down, again with that whoosh sound, then you'll notice that there is our closed body and our closed HTML. I don't need that. I'm just providing just the content. That's it.
Yeah, that way I can focus in on what's unique about what the data or the page that I want to display.
Exactly. And so all I have to do now is just simply say curly paren extends, and then let's say app layout.html. There we go. And then now let's go ahead and say block, and it was called content. And then let's go ahead and come right down here, and let's go ahead and say end block, just like that. Beautiful. So now if I go in and I save that page, and I come back over here and I rerun that, I'm going to see that I made a mistake.
I like that. It showed up as straight text.
Whoa. Give me 1 second here. What did I? Yeah, extends. Oh, really? Is that what you're going to yell at me for? Oh, I see what I did. Sorry. There we go. Typo. Typos will eventually be the death of me. So I was right to have the quotes. I just missed the closing percent sign. There we go. So now what you're going to notice is that there is that little outer structure that we've got with application name and home and about and contact. And there's my list of artists. And you are going to notice, Susan, that it looks a little bit better than
That's a little
it did
better
before.
Yep. And there was an interesting comment actually from someone who took the Flask course going, boy, that looks awfully familiar. If you've worked with Python and Flask and you've worked with this same concept of master layouts, it's actually the same thing when you work with Python and Flask as it is with Python and Django.
Yeah, yep, absolutely. The Jinja templates that are used in Flask, really very similar to what's used inside of Django. So, and again, like Susan mentioned, all the concepts, are very similar. Okay, cool. So, I could run around to each of the individual pages and start, updating them, but I think you start to get the point there. So let's turn our attention to the question that's been on everybody's mind, which is Bootstrap. Now, once again, I don't have time to teach everything with Bootstrap. John Galloway and I actually came through the studio, did a full day on Bootstrap. If you head on over
I'll put the link to that Bootstrap MVA up in the Q&A window so people can find it.
Yeah, it's also in the slide deck as well.
Oh, perfect. Awesome.
Yeah. So if you want more about Bootstrap, you can check that out. Or if you head on over to edX, that's very unprofessional as a presenter for me to do it that way. But in any event, if you head back over to edX, what you're going to notice is that there's a Bootstrap course there as well, which has neat little labs and things like that. I might be biased because I also built the edX course. So I'm not going to try and teach everything about Bootstrap, but what I do want to do is introduce it, and in particular, I want to introduce the grid system, which will help you at least start laying data out and kind of making things look good that way. So the question is, what is Bootstrap? Well, Bootstrap is a collection of CSS and JavaScript files, and it's actually the most popular framework for developing responsive mobile-first projects on the web, which begs the question, well, what in the world is responsive and mobile-first, and why bother with all of this nonsense? Well, first of all, CSS can be tricky. It can really be a pain having to deal with CSS. I swear to you, there are days when I'm using CSS and I feel like I'm just tricking the browser to get it to do what I want it to do. Maybe that's just me, but something tells me there are other people that are listening to me that feel the same way at times. On top of that, dealing with cross-browser support can be a challenge that, if you remember back to the good old days when all we had was Internet Explorer and Netscape Navigator when I was your age, it was just two browsers. Well, now it's Mozilla, it's Firefox, it's Safari, it's IE, it's
and then there's
Opera.
The tablet version of these browsers for the the phablets, the tablets, the phones.
And they're all going to have different screen sizes, and they're all going to support. Again, I got better things to do with my time, and so Bootstrap is going to help take care of that, and it's going to help take care of those basic things that we want, like cool little buttons and dialog boxes and so forth. And so it's going to handle all of that for us. And so I can, with one page, make it so that it looks perfect inside of a browser and make sure that it looks perfect inside of a mobile browser as well. And I love the fact that it's a very nice little Lumia icon there. Okay. Now, the biggest question that people always ask me when they go in and they look at a page that's been using Bootstrap, and I'm going to go grab the index, is they'll ask me, hey, Christopher, what in the world is col MD4. What in the world is all of that about? Well, let me kind of break this down for you. So Bootstrap uses a grid system. So think about a grid, okay, just like a table. So a grid is going to have rows. It's going to have columns. So col, short for column. All right, cool. All right, that part's cool. And then at the end, we've got 4. Well, that's going to be the number of columns that we now want to use. So col, column, 4, going to be the number of columns. Well, the next question then is, all right, well, what does that MD mean? Well, that MD is going to allow us to target a particular screen size. And I'm going to get to that in just a moment, but let's kind of dial back and talk about our columns and the amount of space and size that we're going to take up. So if we take a look at how to size our content, what you're going to notice is that they give us a little kind of diagram here. And you're going to notice that there's 1, 1, 1 for all of our different columns right here, there. That was a hard sentence to build. And so if we count all the way across, what you're going to notice is that it's 12 columns.
Okay.
And so Bootstrap gives you a grid where every row is going to have 12 columns.
Okay.
And what's nice about 12 columns, and yes, it's always 12 columns. Technically, yes, you could go in and change it, but don't. 12 columns. The reason that it's 12 columns, there is some logic here, is think about the number 12. That 12 is a wonderful, wonderful number. Because if I want to be able to divide something in half, I can. 6. So you'll notice right here, column D6, and that's now going to be half and half. You want to divide something in thirds. Cool. You can absolutely do that. Because after all, 12 divided by 3 is going to be 4 and 4 and 4. So there you go, you've got thirds. If you want it in quarters, then you could go ahead and just simply do column D3, column D3, column D3, column D3. So you're going to notice that all of the typical sizes and ways of dividing up a screen that you might want, you get by having the number 12 there. So there is some method to the madness of the number 12. And so just to kind of close all this off, let's say that you want something, to be 1/3 and 2/3, then you could do that by using 8 and 4. So 12 is a very nice number for being able to divide things up. So that's why it is 12. Some thought went into this.
Yeah, so if I have a really large screen that I'm working with, it'll be displayed on, then I can divide my content up into 12 parts because there's so much space. But if I'm dealing with a smaller screen, I might only want to have 2 parts in it because there just isn't room to display a lot of different things going across the page.
This is why I like presenting with you. That is a perfect segue into my slide. So if we take a look here,
like
this
I knew
is
it
the
was
point
coming.
that Susan just made. Thank you. Is we have 4 different screen sizes that Bootstrap supports. We've got large, we've got medium, we've got small, and we've got extra small. And so if I'm dealing with a large screen, like these planar somethings are, then I'm going to have a lot of real estate that I can work with. And so if something only takes up, let's say 1/6 of the screen, I mean, 1/6, what do you figure? That's right about,
That's about half.
That's about half, thank you. So let's say, right about here, that's, what do you figure? That's about a 1/6?
That looks about a 6, yeah,
Okay.
right?
Yeah, somewhere in that ballpark. So that's actually still a decent amount of real estate. I could actually read that. Or, maybe if we go out to about a third, that's going to be about there. I could definitely read something that's that size. But on the flip side, if we get in and we take a look, for example, at my lovely Lumia 1020, if I'm talking about a third of a screen here, I mean, that's
a very small space to try and show anything more than a notification telling you got email.
Yeah, and even that, yeah. I mean, that's not a whole lot of real estate. So when we start targeting a smaller device, I'm going to need to make things bigger. That instead of only taking up a third, I might want to be able to take up half. And that's exactly what Bootstrap allows me to do by having all of these different screen sizes. So I can say on a small screen that I want it to take up more space, and I can say on a large screen I want to take up less space because I know how all of this is going to display out. Now, you'll notice that by default, Visual Studio only worries about medium, and there's kind of a reason for that. The reason that it uses medium is that with smaller screen sizes, anything that you set will automatically apply to the larger. So if I just simply say col MD4, that will apply to medium and to large. So I've got my medium, so my typical like laptops, and my large, my desktops, full-blown monitors, those are now covered. because of the fact that we didn't say anything about smaller sizes, what will happen is Bootstrap, and there we go. I'm going to go back home here. Bootstrap, if I go down to a smaller size, will just stack something one on top of the other, and it will just give us this little vertical scroll. So it will give us everything right there. So I can make it nice and big, and you'll notice that now I've got column, column. And you'll notice that if I make it smaller, that everything is now single column. So it's kind of a very nice little starting point. It's probably not, of course, going to be where you're eventually going to wind up. But if you were going to say, hey, look, just give me something that's going to display and look kind of decent, that's something that's going to display and look kind of decent, you know? And that's a good place to be, I think, anyway. OK, so now let's talk about how we can then add that into our display. And so let's, where in the world am I? There I am, yay, okay. So let's say that I now wanted to have something only take up maybe a little bit of space, or maybe I also wanted to add like the year formed onto my artist display. So instead of using this unordered list, let's go ahead and get rid of that. What I'm going to do every time we get a brand new artist is I'm now going to create a brand new row. So I'm going to say div, and I'm going to say class equals row. And that's now going to give us a brand new row every time that we find an artist. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to, and I love this little shortcut, Control K for kilo, Control S as in Sierra, or surround with. And so now what I can do is I can choose HTML. Thank you for typing that into the window. And I can choose div. And now it will put a div tag around that little anchor that we had just created. Oh, you're not going to tab over for me. You stink. There we go. Beautiful. OK, so now let's say that I want the year, or the name rather, to take up maybe 3 columns. So I can go in and I can say class equals col MD 3. There we go. And then I could also add in a little spot for the year formed as well. So we'll go ahead and say div, and then class equals col, and maybe that only needs 1 column. So MD1, there we go. And then we'll go ahead and say curly, curly, artist, year formed. There we go. Beautiful. And so now I'm going to have everything kind of nice, neat little grid, nice, neat little columns. And so now I come back over here, I go back to artists, and sure enough, everything is in nice, neat little columns, all through the magic of Bootstrap. And I could also go in and start using like the Bootstrap tables if I wanted that in table format, or whatever it is that that you might want. Now, I know there's probably a lot of questions in the Q&A, kind of trying to dig deeper into Bootstrap and dig deeper into Bootstrap. And I do want to go back to the slide that I started with here. Bootstrap in 5 minutes. I've actually been talking about Bootstrap for about 10 minutes here, and obviously have still barely begun to scratch the surface.
Well, that's why you have a full MVA on the Bootstrap.
Exactly, yeah. Full MVA, full edX course.
But I'm seeing from the Q&A that people understand this is how you do your responsive design.
Exactly.
And that's it. You're getting it. That's the key point we want to get across
here.
In terms of all the nitty-gritty of the syntax for all that responsive design. That's not specific to Django. We just want to make sure you understand that that Bootstrap technology is available to you when you're using Django as well. You're not limited here.
Yep, exactly. OK, now I've developed this cool site.
Yes.
I'm very proud of this. And Susan?
I plan to retire once this website goes live. I figure this will bring in millions. OK, maybe not.
Okay.
No pressure, Christopher.
Yeah, no kidding. So I'm very proud of what we've developed. No, Susan, are you very proud of what we've developed?
I think I am. You know what? It's pretty awesome.
So let's take this website and let's go make your millions of dollars, Susan. Let's make this thing public, and let's deploy this out to Azure somewhere that we can go ahead and take this public. So what are we going to need? Well, we're going to need a web server that's publicly accessible, and we're going to need a database that's accessible to our web server. Now, there's a host of possible solutions. You could, stand up your own Apache or IIS box if you want to. Or you could use a cloud service. You could use AWS. You could use, whatever.
I've got another one.
Yeah, go ahead.
How about, there's this one, it's just named after a color, Azure.
Azure. Hey, there we
or
go.
Azure. I honestly still don't know how it's pronounced.
I go with Azure.
Okay.
I go with Azure. So in any event, let's go ahead and actually deploy this out to Azure. And so why Azure? Well, what's great about Azure is that regardless of the language that you want to use, regardless of the tools that you want to use, regardless of the database even that you want to use, Azure can host your application. And I want to point something out here that's going to be very important as we go through the rest of the demo, is the fact that I'm going to use Python and I'm going to use MySQL. So I'm not going to use a single Microsoft product, I suppose, say for Visual Studio, to deploy this out. And it is all going to run and work on Azure, which I think is pretty cool. Now, the basic steps here are to create the database, to update the application to use said database, to create the website, and then finally, last but not least, is to upload the application to the server.
Right. I mean, right now you have a database and you've updated the database, but the problem is you've updated it all locally. So now you have to create all that out there on where you're going to host it finally.
Exactly. Exactly. So let's go ahead and take a look at how to set up the database. And so Azure supports almost any database that you might want. And as it turns out, Django also supports almost any database that you might want. So if you want to use SQL Server, if you want to use MySQL, if you want to use Oracle, then you can absolutely do that. Now, which database should you choose? So often it really is just a matter of personal preference. Now, for me, I like SQL Server. I use SQL Server. So that's what I personally would choose. But we've been doing OSS. Let's stick with OSS. Let's go ahead and go with MySQL here. And so don't show my screen for just a moment, only because actually it's probably not going to matter at the end of the day. Manage.windows azure.com. There we go. I know exactly what my problem is. Give me 1 second here.
Oh, you need to, it thinks you're logged into someone else?
Yeah.
Control-Shift-P to bring up an in-private browser session, and then you can log into someone else if you need to. It's one of my favorite ones. One of the things about logging into Azure is sometimes you're logged into a computer with a different account than you'd be using to log into Azure. So when you launch a browser session, by default, it assumes you want to use the account you used to log in. So Control-Shift-P, very handy little trick with Internet. Control-Shift-P with a little short keyboard shortcut that'll actually open up a browser session with different authentication. So you can actually be logged in with a different account on one browser window versus another browser window, which is, I find very handy actually when I'm browsing to Azure because I'm frequently having to log in. Ha! And now as an added bonus, once in a while when you're using Azure and you connect with from a location you don't usually connect from, it'll actually go, I just want to make sure for security reasons that you are who you say you are, and it chooses that moment to ask you to verify and say, I'll send a code to your phone, and then you have to enter that code. So of course, because we're doing this live, this is the time Azure picks to ask Christopher to not only log in, but to authenticate.
Yeah, but I have to be honest here. I can't blame Azure for that. I actually have two-factor authentication enabled on my phone.
Okay, there we go. All right, because that does happen occasionally as well.
It absolutely does happen on occasion. Yeah, it's a good thing. It's a good thing. It is.
It's like
but it is just one of those things. You're trying to keep the rhythm going, and all of a sudden, boom! I now got to do this. Okay, so let's go back to my little Azure here. And I'm going to create a brand new MySQL database. And so what I did is I logged on to manage.windowsazure.com, and I'm going to click New, and then I'm going to click Marketplace. And this is now where I can go find, that MySQL database here. And moving your mouse makes it go faster. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to scroll on down, and there is ClearDB MySQL database. So I'm going to choose that, and then I'm going to hit Next. And then it's going to say, all right, well, what pricing structure would you like to choose? And so you can go ahead and choose there. I kind of like free.
Free is great. When you're just trying things out and learning things, I mean, it really is. It's a good sandbox.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and call this Music Store. There we go. And we'll keep it in West US. So this is actually going to create that database. It's going to call that music store and give this just a moment here.
And what's cool about this is you're actually going to do this with MySQL, not with SQLite. So where you're actually going to change now from one database product to another. So this is an example of the power of Django.
Absolutely. Cool. So now that's going to create, and that is going to take it a couple of moments. So I'm going to kind of let that happen in the background, and then it's going to say, all right, well, now how do we get everything up to date? And in particular, how do we get our database up to date? Because Susan had mentioned just a couple of moments ago that we've been using SQLite. And so inside of SQLite, we had that little structure. Well, now that we've created that brand new database, how do we take that and get that set up? Here's what's awesome is, just as Susan mentioned, it's the exact same thing. That we're still going to use the exact same code, that we're going to say Python, manage py, migrate, and it will automatically do its thing. But we do need to update our settings py, and we also need to update our application. OK, so let's go back to here. That looks like it's created. Cool. And so now I'm going to click on that, and I'm now going to click on connection info. And that will give us our connection info. Now, I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to paste this into Notepad. And this is, in fact, going to display a password out on my screen. But I honestly don't care, because I'm going to delete this database immediately, and it's just a random password anyway. OK, so it gives me my database. It gives me my data source. It gives me my user ID, and it gives me my password. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to my settings py file, and there we go. And if we take a look here, if we scroll down to our databases, what you're going to notice is that it wants a name, it wants a user, it wants a password, and it wants a host. So as far as the name goes, that's going to be the name of the database that we specified. So that's going to be Music Store, which is spelled like that. The next thing is it is going to want to know where the database is. So that's going to be our data source. So let's go grab that. Host. There we go. And then it's going to want the user ID. And let's go ahead and grab that. There we go. And boom. And then last but not least is our little password. So let's go ahead and put that right there. Now, the last little thing is you'll notice the engine. And so DjangoDB backends and SQLite might be just fine for using SQLite, but obviously it's not going to work for MySQL. In order to use MySQL, we actually need to do two things. We need to tell it, hey, use MySQL. But number two is we also need a library to connect to MySQL. It doesn't have that library by default. And there's a few that are available. The one that I want to use is, and I'm going to say, right-click on my environment. There we go. And I want to...
You just want to go to your existing environment.
There we go. Yeah, I just needed to drill down far enough. There we go. And I'm going to say install Python package, and I want my SQL client. And so now I'm going to click OK, and this will go ahead and download and install. And while it's doing that, I'm going to take a sip of water.
There we go. Good plan. Cheers.
Cheers. See? All right. So now that this was all installed successfully, let's go ahead and actually try this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, just like Susan did earlier this morning, is I'm going to open up a brand new command prompt. And I'm now going to type Python, and I'm going to type, by the way, I'm going to hedge my bet just a little bit here. There's a chance that this might fail. I couldn't remember the engine string off the top of my head. I'm 98% certain that that's right. I might have to go look that up real quick. Right. Because it's one of those things, you type that in once and you never go back and do that again.
It's the kind of thing you look up when you need it.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're coders. We all look things up when we need them.
Exactly. So I'm just simply going to say Python manage py migrate, which does that initial migration for us.
And you didn't bother creating a migration package.
Look at that. It just worked. Yeah, you're right. I didn't bother creating the migration package because if you just do that initial
Well, you've already got it.
Hold on. I didn't save the settings file.
Ah, OK. I said, but keep in mind, right, you may already have a migration package that's created that will create it for the database. And so
exactly.
on, so.
Yep.
So it just depends. It depends a bit on if you're working with different databases and so on, if you'll need to recreate the migration package or not. Sometimes you can reuse your existing migration package. Sometimes you'll want to create a new migration package. I would say if you're changing databases, you might want to generate a new migration package. It's going to depend.
What?
Oh, now comes the strange error messages popping up.
Yeah, give me just a second here. Because the thing is that I didn't save it, so I think I just need to reopen. I might need to reopen everything. Manage, migrate.
And
there we go. Yeah, I just needed to close the window and reopen it because what happened was when I initially opened this, I hadn't saved the settings file, so it wasn't ready to use it. And then I said, go ahead and do the migrate. So all it did was it just went to the SQLite database. So I needed to just close the window back out, save my settings, and then reopen it. Now you're going to notice that it works. And by the way, I just want to point out I did in fact remember the connection string properly.
Well done.
Go me.
Got that right on the first try.
So that in YouTube was formed in 1976. So you'll notice that it automatically set that up, which also now means that if I go back to my artists here, there's no artists. Why? Because this is now using that MySQL backend, and I could go grab a MySQL client and prove it, but I think this pretty well does that. And so you'll also now notice that if I go in and I say create, I can still, still my ugly, I'm going to say U2, and I'm going to say 1976.
You're very proud of that, aren't you?
I am. And I'm going to hit save, and you'll notice that sure enough, there it is, and you'll notice that everything is functional. So it's all working. It's just now using our MySQL database inside of the cloud. It's not using SQLite any longer. Cool. So if we go back to our little steps here, we've created the database, check. We've updated the application to use the database, check. Now what we need to do is to create the website and upload the application to the server. And so the question is, how could we do that? Well, we could, there's our little creating website. We could, if we wanted to, go to the Azure UI, or better yet, we could just use Visual Studio.
Okay.
Let's just use Visual Studio.
All right.
Right click.
So there was a comment, somebody was asking, of course, can you deploy to Azure with these other than Visual Studio? Absolutely, you can deploy to GitHub, you can use FTP.
Yeah.
You've got lots of choices in terms of the tools you use to deploy. We've been working in Visual Studio all day, so because of that, we're going to take advantage of the features in Visual Studio to do the deployment.
Exactly. Yep. So I'm just going to right click and I'm going to say publish because I'm going to use Visual Studio. And you'll notice that sure enough, there it all is. So I'm going to say Microsoft Azure Web Apps. So let's click on that. And it's going to ask me to sign in again.
As the day goes on, the typing skills get worse. And yet there's people out there, it's like 2 in the morning for them. I'm very impressed. I'll stand here, I'll wave and say, so those of you who are still up with us at 2 and 3 in the morning, I'm very impressed. We are getting near the end. You will get to sleep soon. And this is the point where now it's at, you mean now, okay, this is awesome. Now it is chosen to ask him to actually.
No, still the same thing.
Two-factor authentication.
Yep, two-factor authentication.
Got set up.
Yep.
So it's saying if you're going to log in, I'm going to get you to check in with the computer and with the phone because he set up two-factor authentication for Azure.
There we go.
Extra security takes a little extra time.
Yep. Okay. So now what you're going to notice here is that I could choose one of my existing, or I could say new. And then just go ahead and give this a name. I'm curious, Music Store? Nope, Music Store MVA. There we go. And let me throw this onto my Visual Studio. And let's create a new service plan, MVA. Let's go with our West US and West US. And I'm actually going to leave it with no database because this would actually set up a SQL database, which I don't want.
Yeah, you already have set up your own MySQL database. So
exactly. Yep. So let's go ahead and hit create, chugga, chugga, chugga. And this is going to take it about 40 seconds, which stop and think about having to stand up your own IIS server and go about it that way. Here I just went, I want there that create, go, and it will automatically go ahead and do everything for me. Okay. And again.
So this is just creating an empty website for us where we can now go move all our web pages so that they'll be actually hosted in the cloud rather than having them locally.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I suppose I could host this all on my computer, but that's probably not.
I said by the time you're done, actually, in
Yeah.
theory, everybody out there should be able to, until you shut down that website. If you're watching it live.
Should.
Oh, yeah, no, we haven't set up. We
well,
have to give permission to your IP addresses too.
Actually, no, that part is good. It's the fact that the free only allows 4 concurrent connections.
Ah, okay. Because we're using the free version.
Yeah, leave it alone. Don't do anything with it. Okay. So anyway, just kind of next and finish the rest of the way out here. Started. Chugga. And
Still going?
It's still going. There we go.
All right.
Adding a whole bunch of libraries.
That looks encouraging.
That looks very encouraging. And I was able to do all of this straight through Visual Studio, which is always nice. Didn't have to leave the tool that I was in, which I liked. I had to fire up a browser to create MySQL, but that was really it. And oh, move my mouse, it'll go faster. Thank you, Danny. Clockwise or counterclockwise? Counterclockwise. Okay. Oh, okay.
Yeah. There we go. Now it's going.
There we go. I remember the good old days of having a turbo button on the computer. I always got to click a turbo button. I mean, really, when did you not want turbo? You always want turbo.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely.
This goes to 11. All right. Thank you for laughing at that, Danny. Okay. This is why I like Danny. Danny laughs at my bad jokes.
That's good, since most of the jokes
are bad. Yeah. All right.
So how do we?
Okay. Yep. You know, while this is going in the background, let me just kind of real quick here. Where do we go from here? The Django docs. Let me just bring up that site real quick. Of course.
Now it comes up.
Yeah. The moment you skip away from it, that's when it decides that it wants to
but it's done.
to come up. Yeah. So this is now causing the application to execute. This is again just going to take it a moment to get warmed up here. There we go. And so now let me go into artists.
And you can see, because the URL is azurewebsites.net, we're now pointing to the website on Azure, and there's U2 on our Azure website.
Exactly, yeah. More importantly, yeah, there is U2 right there. And you'll also notice that if I go in and I say create, of course, that there is our little form. Let me go ahead and say the cure, and let's go ahead and say 1978, and let's hit save. And sure enough, there's the cure, and all of this is now being hosted on MySQL. This is not on MySQLite because it would have no way of getting over to my system. So we've taken our application, and again, let me just stress this, using Python and MySQL. So not a single Microsoft product that it's using to run this. And then we uploaded this, and this is now all running inside of Azure. That's
It's pretty cool. Awesome.
I like it. Yeah.
I like it.
All right. So last little thing then is kind of a where do we go from here?
Yeah, because we've already said we couldn't cover everything. We can't get into it. There's questions about security, authentication, and exactly where are the next resources?
Check out the Django docs. I love the Django docs. And let me be clear, I don't often say that about documentation. But what I really like about the Django docs is it gives you very nice little examples that you can then manipulate for your own purposes. And it gives you a very nice kind of deeper dive into the API. So that way, if you really do want to start digging right in, then you have that ability. So I really do like the docs. If you are curious in Bootstrap, I know Susan threw out the URLs earlier. You'll notice that we've got MVA. You'll notice that we've got edX for learning more about Bootstrap. Whew.
And breathe.
Yeah, no kidding. So that's an overview of Django. Hopefully, and this is, of course, the goal of all of these is to help get you started. So hopefully this helped kind of, clarify a few things, hopefully made things a little bit less foggy when it comes to getting started in Django, and hopefully this kind of gave you a really nice foundation to build from. That is Susan Ibach, Hockey Geek Girl. I'm Christopher Harrison, Geek Trainer. Please do fill out the little form down at the very bottom as to whether or not that you liked us. Hopefully we'll see you guys back here again for another Web Wednesday, for another MVA. And Susan, thanks again for
always a pleasure.
All the help.
And thank you all of you for joining us. It would not be any fun without you.
Yep. Cheers.